Have you ever been on a trip with your children and feel like no matter what you do, it's not enough to satisfy them? I remember a friend of mine talking about how he and his family took a trip a few years ago now with two elementary-aged girls. And after several days spent at this hotel with this huge water park built into the hotel, all the food that they could eat, ice cream every day, which I'm not going to lie, sounds a little good right now, they began their trek home. The problem is that as they were on their way home, they had to drive past, just a little bit off the interstate, this huge indoor trampoline park that they had been to before. And after several days of all this fun, driving by the trampoline park, you can imagine what the girls asked. Can we go there? And they were in a hurry, so the answer was no, and according to my friend, that was not the right answer. They lost it. And he frames this parenting adventure, and many of his parenting adventures, to be honest, around this question, what have you done for me lately? And according to him, not me, him, kids that age are like Dory from Finding Nemo. They suffer from short-term memory loss. I got ice cream today? Who cares? This is what I want right now. If I don't get it, I'm going to be upset. Now, I know I make that sound awful, but truthfully, kids are not the only ones who suffer from the "what have you done for me lately" syndrome. In fact, we all do from time to time, even the best of us. We can become so focused on reaping the benefits of something that we fail to appreciate the times that we received something in the past. Over the last 2 weeks of this journey through our series, Food for Thought, we've been in the Hebrew Bible, or our Old Testament, reflecting on two moments where God showed up and provided for the Israelite people. First, for the people as a whole, as they were heading out of Egypt and into the desert, overwhelmed by this sense of fear at the journey in front of them, and God showed up and promised to provide. And every morning as they journeyed through the wilderness, they woke up to bread from heaven. Last week, we looked at the prophet Elijah when he was struggling with some of the darkest emotions a person can deal with. God showed up. God fed him, sustained him for his journey back to the Mount of God. In each case, God shows up, God provides, and God sustains them. God gives them what they needed in that moment. And just like God did back then, God still does that today. In fact, it's not just something that I believe. I've experienced it in my own life, as I'm sure many of you have as well. But as I reflected on our passage for this week, I could not shake the feeling that although what we've explored up to this point is 100% true, there's a potential pitfall in it. Not because of any failing in God, but because of the "what have you done for me lately" attitude that we can so easily fall into. How many of us have begun to doubt in God's goodness, doubt in God's provision, doubt in God's sustaining power when we feel like God hasn't or isn't showing up to satisfy what we want? And to a certain degree, that is the situation Jesus finds himself in this portion of John chapter 6. In the first part of John chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000 people with a couple loaves of bread and a few fish. Then afterwards, Jesus sends his disciples across the lake while he retreated to pray. And as they encountered a storm, Jesus then walks on the water to them. Now the next morning, the crowd wakes up, and they heard Jesus sending his disciples across the lake, and they expected Jesus to be there in the morning. But they wake up, and he's nowhere to be found. So they frantically search for him. And once they find him, there's this back and forth with the crowd asking questions and Jesus giving answers that really don't make it any clearer. Jesus' answers are only leading to more questions from the crowd as they attempt to figure out who this Jesus is. And in the back and forth, they are constantly asking Jesus, What are the works of God? Perform a work for us. In essence, this crowd is asking this person whom they had just seen perform a miracle not the day before, what have you done for us lately? And they are seeking Jesus not out of a sense of devotion to him, but because of what they could receive from him. And Jesus calls them out on it. Finally, Jesus says in verse 30, you're asking this time and again to see the work of God. Here it is. Believe in the one God has sent. And the crowd is like, okay, if that's you, give us a sign. Show us. Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. What are you going to do for us? And again, this is despite them seeing Jesus feed 5,000 just the day before. And so our passage begins this morning as a response to them asking this question. And Jesus tells them, the bread your ancestors received, it didn't come from Moses, it came from my Father. In fact, God gives you the true bread that comes down from heaven, and this bread gives life to the whole world. And their response, once again, demonstrates that though they're hearing Jesus, they're more interested in what they can receive from him than any commitment to him. And so they ask Jesus, give us this bread that gives life to the world. Give it to us always. Give us this bread of life always. These words point to a desire that is inside each and every one of us, I think. We desperately want our deepest longings and desires to be fulfilled. And so much of our lives are spent chasing after those things that we believe will satisfy those deepest and most universal longings within the human heart. We long for peace. We long for love and intimacy, to know and to be known. We long for happiness and contentment in life. We long for a place that feels like home, a place that we feel like we belong to and it belongs to us. We crave a life free of anxiety and fear. We hunger for community, long for forgiveness and redemption from our past mistakes. We crave a life that matters. And we hope that who we are and what we do will make a difference in this world. And because these make up the most essential desires of our hearts, we spend so much time and energy chasing after what we believe will satisfy them. Some throw themselves into being as highly successful as they could be, climbing that corporate ladder of success, or getting all A's on the report card, or being the best at your sport or extracurricular. Any overachievers in the room, more than likely this is you. Because we believe that this doorway to success will provide ultimate satisfaction and peace. Some go from relationship to relationship, seeking to fill that relational intimacy that is essential to each and every one of us through only human connections. But how many people can testify to the reality that their search for intimacy through only human connections has left a trail of brokenness? Broken hearts, broken trust, broken spirits, broken and unhealthy lives. Still others chase after money and wealth, buying into the lie that the more stuff we have equals a happier life. But how many mansions and penthouses are filled with people who have the ability to buy anything their hearts might desire, but are left feeling empty and alone inside? Always wondering if people like me for me or for what I can do for them. And how many people chase after power, believing that in having power, their life will ultimately matter, will make them someone who is important. And their whole identity is wrapped up in their need for power and significance, only to come to the realization that it leads to an incredibly anemic and selfish life that can never truly satisfy. I'm not a fan of too many rappers. I know that might shock you. I actually kind of want to be, and I don't really know why, but I've tried time and again to find a rapper that I like, and am time and again left wanting. But there is one that I have connect with. His name is Nate Ferguson. He goes by the NF, and he prides himself in keeping his music raw and authentic. He talks openly and poetically through his music, often in stark imagery about his mental health struggles. And he is a Christian, although he doesn't write and produce strictly Christian music. But his music, the rawness of it, connects with people from all walks of life. In fact, his third album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Top 200. But in the middle of his fourth album, there is this 49-second interlude. And it sounds like it is a recording of an interview he gave with someone. But in it, he was describing all the success he had accomplished. How almost every concert that he put on in that time frame after his third album was sold out. How he had written probably the best song he would ever write in his life, and he was the most unhappy he had ever felt. And he got to the point where he says, in this interlude, there's got to be something more for me. Because if this is it, it's not going to work. How many of us have chased after things that promised ultimate satisfaction, but in the end left us feeling empty? Always in need of more. Always chasing after that next high, the next affirmation that we are good or important. And like a mouse on a wheel, we run and chase, but get nowhere. Or maybe what we do works for a moment, but eventually it wanes and leaves us feeling even lower and wanting more. Thinking there's got to be something more. Because if this is it, it's not going to work. Give us this bread of life always. We long for it. We desire it. Yet so often we find ourselves chasing after it in all the wrong places. And Jesus, speaking to a crowd who were chasing after signs and wonders, seeking to satisfy their deepest hunger and longings, begging for Jesus to give them this bread of life always, Jesus responds to them this way. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. The truest answer to our deepest longings is Jesus. Not our success, as good as that might be. Not our human relationships, even though they can be good and pure reflections of our ultimate relationship with our Creator and Redeemer. Not in money or wealth or power or influence, even though having these has the ability to grant us the power to do incredibly good and holy work in the world. But the reality is that none of these can replace the vital importance of abiding in, being united to and in relationship with Jesus. And notice the answer to our deepest longings is ultimately not something Jesus gives. Stick with me here. It's not something Jesus gives. It's not in the peace. It's not in the sustenance that we find every morning through difficult seasons. It's not in the joy that is found through surrendering our all to Christ, as good and true as all of these things are. But after all, Jesus doesn't say here, I give to you the bread of life. What does he say? I am the bread of life. Jesus wasn't talking about our physical need for food and water. He was speaking about our deepest spiritual needs and desires. Those parts of our souls that cry out day and night to be satisfied. And Jesus invites each and every one of us to come to him, to believe and put our hope and trust in him, for he is the bread of life. What do you find yourself chasing after this morning? Is it Jesus, or is it someone or something else? Because if it isn't Jesus, it might fill our longings for a moment. But just like when we eat food or drink water, we will come to a moment where we feel that longing inside us once more and begin that search again to find something to satisfy. But when we come to Jesus, when we put our trust in him, when we surrender our lives to follow his way, we find true, abundant, full, and satisfying life in and with him and him alone. Blaise Pascal was a French mathematician, philosopher, and Christian writer from the 1600s. And while the actual quote is much longer and complex, most people shorten or paraphrase his idea in this way: that there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every person, which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ. We were created by God and to find our ultimate home in a relationship with his Son Jesus, the bread of life. He offered himself to the world so that each and every one of us might find salvation and ultimate satisfaction that can only come when we are in relationship with our God, who has been made known to us through the person and work of Jesus Christ. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. We can spend our whole lives chasing after things that promise satisfaction, but leave us wanting more and more. Or we can spend our lives pursuing Christ, surrendering to follow his way, to be in close relationship and connected to him, for he alone can satisfy. Recently, I came across this song that has been one that I've returned to time and again, and I think it speaks to the reality that Jesus is communicating here. Here's some of these words from it. When my hope is on empty, my heart's overdrawn, and the fights that I'm fighting are all but a loss, and the last of my strength is your strength on a cross. You revive me. When my voyage is held by the fear to begin, and my hand is withdrawn from the help of a friend, if I seem to forget all the places we've been, you remind me and love me back to life. Every single time. In your presence, I'm alive. Because of your mercy, because you are kind, you love me back to life. As it was for the people Jesus was talking to in John 6, as it has always been, and as it is for us today, Jesus wants to love you back to life. The choice is yours. Will you let him?